The four in the water. Beaches never scared me until that summer. Salt air used to mean sunscreen, cheap pizza, and skating to the corner store with sand stuck between my toes. But fear has a way of attaching itself to places, like a bird buried in your socks. Once it's in, it follows you everywhere. I was 16 when Charles invited me and our friend Riley to his family's place on the bay side of Long Beach Island. No parents, no chaperones, just three idiots with a long weekend and a grocery bag full of bad ideas. Riley had just gotten his license. He drove like a newborn deer learning how legs worked, so the ride down was all laughter, sudden swerves, shouted directions, and the kind of music you only love when you're 16 and happy. Charles's house sat along a narrow lagoon, a thin black vein of water stitched between rows of houses. From the front, it looked normal, shingled, tidy, a short path to the driveway. The back was what mattered, sliding glass doors opening to a small concrete patio and a heated plunge pool, a spiral staircase climbing up to a connecting deck that laced the second-floor bedrooms together, a side garage with a door that ran you from front to back without anyone in the street seeing you. The lagoon view was a postcard, until it wasn't. We had barely dropped bags in our rooms before the group chat lit up with weekend plans. By sunset we'd lined up three girls from another town, Rosie with the sharp laugh, Alexa whose hair never stayed in a ponytail, and Sophie, quiet until she wasn't. They arrived with neon nails and the kind of confidence that makes 16-year-old boys forget their names. We put music on low, turned the pool jets to warm, and drifted under a sky the color of soda cans. I remember thinking we'd done it, arrived at the exact center of a perfect memory. Someone passed a joint. Someone else topped off plastic cups with liquor filched from parents, who would absolutely have noticed if they'd kept the good stuff in smaller bottles. The water steamed in the night air, smoke lifted and ruined the stars. We were invincible. Then Charles touched the speaker and killed the song mid-chorus. "What are you doing?" Rosie asked, laughing, but her laugh faced the lagoon. The silence that replaced the music was wrong, too sudden, too complete. Somewhere across the water, a dog barked and stopped like it had been switched off. Charles didn't answer. He was staring past me, over my shoulder, toward the opposite dock. I twisted, squinting into the dark. The houses across the channel were cutouts, porches, posts, a leaning boat lift, a string of fairy lights a few doors down. The water lapped at pilings like an old clock clicking. I didn't see anything. "Dude," I said. "It's fine. People live there." "Not that one," he whispered. "They're in Florida this week." Nobody moved. The pool jets ticked to a stop. Steam thinned and the night stepped closer. Alexa tugged her towel around her shoulders like she just remembered weather existed. "I want to go inside," Sophie said, so soft I almost missed it. We were climbing out when Riley jerked like he'd been zapped. His eyes locked on the far dock. "What?" he started, but he didn't finish because movement cut the dark in two. It wasn't big, just a shift, a step, a human rhythm your body recognizes before your mind decides it's real. And then a car turned down the road behind those houses, and its headlights swept the water like a lighthouse beam. For half a heartbeat the opposite dock was lit, the boards, the cleat, and four tall shapes at the edge, shoulder to shoulder, facing us. The light slid away. The shapes vanished with it, but they didn't feel gone. I felt them like a pressure in my jaw. "Go," Charles said. His voice shook. "Now." We stumbled to towels, to the sliding door, to the living room where the cool air felt like oxygen. Riley slammed the glass shut, locked it, checked it again. Charles sprinted to the front door. The girls clustered in the hallway outside the downstairs guest room, hopping on one foot, trying to drag shorts over damp legs, whispering too loudly to be called whispers. My hands wouldn't stop ringing. It was like I'd stuck my fingers in a speaker. That ring became sound, four soft splashes rolling across the lagoon in a clean, terrible sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, Alexa breathed, as if counting would make it less true. "They're swimming," Riley said with a certainty he didn't earn and we didn't question. The air in the house tightened. I felt it in my throat. "Upstairs," Charles said. We can lock. He stopped mid-sentence, swore, and I knew why even before he said it. Deck door. I didn't lock the deck. The spiral staircase outside ran straight from the upstairs deck to the ground, an iron helix you could climb in seconds. The glass slider to that deck was often left cracked to air out the hallway. A habit. A vulnerability. We folded into the downstairs den, the only room without a lagoon view. The house had that empty night sound, appliances thinking, vents breathing, something ticking somewhere. Then, from above us, the soft hush of a shoe on wood. Another. Then a pause long enough to fit a heartbeat through the eye of a needle. They're inside, Sophie said, not a question. We had no plan. No weapon. No sober. Every option had edges. Charles's face kept recalculating. Front door, he said finally, and the six of us moved in one body, quiet as panic allows. We passed the garage door that cut toward the street and didn't try it, because if the spiral had given them a way in, the garage had given them a way around. At the foyer, Riley twisted the knob. The door opened on air lit orange by a street lamp and the green-blue blink of a lawn sprinkler across the road. We didn't look back. We ran. Riley's car coughed awake like it had been sleeping with us. He reversed too fast, clipped the wooden mailbox, and knocked it to an angle it would never recover from. We didn't stop. We didn't talk. Our world shrank to headlights on blacktop and the deaf certainty that the lagoon was behind us but not gone. We didn't go back until the police called and said the house was clear. Even then, we stood in the street while two officers explained what burglars explain when you arrive too late. Upstairs drawers gaped like mouths. Jewelry boxes overturned. TV gone, tablets gone, things that make a family feel like a house taken without asking. The worst of it waited behind the yard gate, where water pushed and pulled like nothing had happened. The boat slip was empty. Charles's dad kept a medium-sized Boston whaler tied there, gleaming, a summer animal that knew the lagoon's every ripple. He kept the spare key tucked in a small hatch beneath the wheel. In case we forget the bag, he'd say, the way fathers say things they learned before password managers existed. The hatch hung open now, a little black mouth that had swallowed common sense whole. The officers were kind in the way people are kind when they can't help you. Reports were filed. Descriptions given. Flashlights combed the edges of the yard and found nothing but footprints we already knew about and water we couldn't hold. The neighbors across the lagoon were in Florida, yes. They posted beach photos earlier that evening. No cameras faced the water. No one saw 4 swimmers arrive. No one saw 4 men leave with a boat that would not come back. We slept at my place that night with the lights on and the sound off. Morning didn't help. Summer air smelled like chlorine and loss. Charles moved through the kitchen as if silence were a bruise. Riley faked jokes that didn't land. We were 16 and had just learned what locks are for. Years dulled the edges but didn't file them down. I still check sliders twice. I still hate the sound a shoe makes on wood in a quiet house. When people talk about the shore, I picture the moment the car's headlights washed the opposite dock and turned a normal night into a story. Later there would be an update, something stranger, something that tried to tie a knot in a rope that didn't want to hold. But that belongs to another chapter. For now, all I have is this, the lagoon at night, still as a held breath, and the memory of 4 soft splashes pulling the dark toward us, one after another, after another, after another. The reunion. I never expected to see Charles again. We'd gone our separate ways after high school, different colleges, different cities, the kind of quiet drift that happens when a shared trauma becomes too awkward to mention. We texted once a year on birthdays, less after that. The lagoon night stayed locked in our heads, something we both quietly agreed not to open again. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. It was almost 10 years later when I found myself standing in the lobby of our old high school gym, now lit up for a reunion I hadn't planned to attend. My girlfriend had convinced me to go, saying I needed to get up more. I'd expected an awkward night of small talk, but instead, I saw Charles, and beside him, Riley, laughing with a few familiar faces. For a second, it was like time hadn't moved at all. Same grin, same nervous laugh, same restless energy. Charles spotted me first. No way, he said, half smiling as he pulled me into a hug. Even then, I noticed it, the tension behind his eyes, the same haunted distance that had followed him since that night. We talked about work, relationships, the usual surface-level things. But after a few drinks and the crowd thinning out, Charles leaned closer. Hey, he said. You remember that summer at the beach house? My throat went dry. How could I forget? He exhaled, rubbing his palms together. There's something you need to hear. We left the reunion together, walking down a rain-slicked street to a half-empty dive bar that smelled like salt and wood polish. It was the kind of place you went to forget, not remember. Charles ordered a beer and stared into it for a long time before speaking. You remember my little brother Kieran? Yeah, I said. Kid was what, 10? He nodded slowly. He's 19 now. And he's got the same problem we had, curiosity. I leaned in, already uneasy. What do you mean? He took another drink. A year ago, he and some friends took our new boat out without permission. They went toward Carl Island, you know, that wildlife preserve past the inlet? I did. Locals called it the Forbidden Sandbar. No one went there after dark. Charles continued, voice low. They were drinking. Being stupid. Anchored near the island, swam to shore to hang out and watch the sunset. But then, they saw another boat already anchored farther down. He paused, watching the condensation trail down his glass. Kieran swore it looked exactly like our old whaler. I sat up. The stolen one? He nodded. The same. Same shape, same markings. Even the chipped white paint on the hull. That's impossible, I said, half whispering. Yeah, he muttered. That's what I told him too. Kieran, according to Charles, couldn't let it go. The boys swam out to get a closer look. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the world was painted in silver and blue. The water was cold, their laughter thin. When they reached the boat, they said it felt familiar, the same scuffed deck, the same faint smell of gasoline and mildew. But what they didn't expect was the silence. The boat looked abandoned, no lights, no movement, just anchored there like something waiting to be found. They didn't have their phones, Charles said. They swam over without them. Kieran wanted proof. His plan was to swim back to their own boat, grab a phone, and take pictures before it got too dark. But when they returned to the shore, something had changed. There was a man standing on the beach, Charles said, his voice tightening, holding something in his hand. I frowned. A flashlight? He shook his head. A shovel. According to Kieran, the man didn't shout or wave. He just started walking toward them. At first, they thought he was a ranger. Maybe they were busted for trespassing. But then the man began moving faster, the shovel dragging slightly behind him, scraping through the sand. Kieran yelled out, but the man didn't respond. He just kept coming. They ran. All three boys bolted for their boat, kicking through the surf, adrenaline drowning out the beer. When Kieran looked back, the man was running too, not after them anymore, but back toward the other boat. They scrambled aboard and started the engine. It sputtered before roaring to life, and as they turned out toward open water, Kieran swore he heard a second engine start up behind them, faint, distant, but real. He told Charles it was the longest 15 minutes of his life. Every shadow on the water looked like pursuit. Every ripple behind them felt like something gaining ground. But when they reached the channel and the lights of LBI came into view, the sound faded. They made it back without ever seeing the man again. When Charles finished, he sat back, exhaling hard. I told my parents, he said. They called the cops, again. Filed another report. But the police said there's no way to prove it was our old boat. No photos, no registration numbers, nothing. I stared at him, trying to find words. You think it was the same people? He shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe the boat changed hands a dozen times. But that man, the shovel, it doesn't make sense. The jukebox hummed somewhere behind us. Rain pattered against the windows. "What was he doing out there?" I asked quietly. Charles's jaw clenched. "Burying something," he said finally. "Or digging it up." The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the image: a man standing on an empty beach, shovel in hand, beside a boat that should have been gone for years. Something about it felt unfinished. Like the story wasn't over yet. And deep down, I knew Charles felt the same. Whatever was stolen that night on the lagoon hadn't been gone. It had been waiting. Waiting for someone else to find it. The man on the island. I didn't want to believe Charles's story, but it wouldn't leave me alone. For weeks after that night at the bar, I kept replaying the details: the stolen boat, the man with the shovel, and the faint hum of an engine following them through the darkness. I told myself it was just one of those eerie coincidences that make the world feel smaller than it is. But then, about a month later, Charles called me again. His voice on the other end of the line wasn't the same. It had that quiet, clipped tone that people use when they've seen something they don't understand. "Hey," he said. "I think there's something else you need to know." Charles's little brother Kieran hadn't been sleeping. Since that night on the island, he'd been waking up to strange sounds: soft thuds from the direction of the backyard, the gentle creak of the dock at odd hours, the sound of something brushing against the hull of their boat. At first, his parents dismissed it. The lagoon often carried noise from other docks. But Kieran said it felt personal. Like whatever was making those sounds was right beneath his window. Watching. Waiting. And then one morning, he found footprints, wet, bare footprints, leading from the dock to the back stairs. Charles's dad checked the cameras, but the feeds glitched between 1 o'clock and 3 a.m., showing nothing but static. The same 2 hours every night. That's when Kieran decided he had to go back. He told Charles he was going to the island again, this time sober, and during the day. Charles tried to stop him, but Kieran was stubborn. He wanted proof. 2 days later, Kieran and one of his friends, Matt, took the boat out again. This time, they brought a drone and a camera. It was around 5 p.m. when they reached Carl Island. The tide was low, the beach exposed and quiet. They anchored in the same place as before, about 30 yards from shore. From the boat, the island looked like a strip of overgrown sand and grass, bordered by tangled marsh. But as they walked along the dunes, they noticed something strange: patches of freshly disturbed sand. "Like something had been dug up recently," Charles said, recounting what his brother told him. "Not animal holes, not footprints, deeper, wider, cleaner." Near one of those spots, Kieran found an old rope buried halfway in the sand, frayed but still knotted, leading toward the waterline. The air was heavy with rot and salt. He told Matt to start the drone. It buzzed to life, rising into the air and circling above the island, its camera feeding live footage back to Kieran's phone. At first, everything looked normal: dunes, grass, shoreline, their own boat anchored offshore. But then something flickered across the screen. A shadow. At the edge of the marsh, a figure was standing. Not moving. Facing the drone. Matt thought it was just a trick of the camera, a bush, maybe a piece of driftwood catching light. But when the drone tilted slightly, the figure stepped forward. And then it raised something. A shovel. The feed cut to black. They didn't wait. Kieran and Matt bolted for the boat, splashing through knee-deep water, the sound of their own breath loud enough to drown the world. When they climbed aboard, the drone's remote was still beeping, signal lost. Kieran fired up the engine, eyes scanning the island. There was nothing there now, no movement, no shadow, just stillness. But then, as they were leaving, Matt saw something in the distance. Another boat, anchored farther down the shore. The same chipped paint. The same faded lettering on the side, partly sanded off, but still visible beneath the layers. "It was the whaler," Charles said. His voice was shaking when he told me this. Kieran swore it was the same one. He said he could see the old decal through the paint. They didn't go closer this time. They just left, full throttle, straight through the channel, until the island was nothing more than a dark smear on the horizon. Later that night, when Kieran checked the drone's SD card, he found only one file that wasn't corrupted. It was just 6 seconds long. Grainy, unstable, filmed just before the signal died. You could see the edge of the island, the sand, the grass, the beginning of the marsh. And then the figure appeared closer now, half in shadow. The face wasn't visible. But there was something off about the way it stood, still, straight, and wrong, like it was waiting for the camera to notice it. Then, as the drone wobbled, the figure turned its head, not toward the drone, but toward the water. And from the darkness of the lagoon behind it, came movement. At least 3 others. Each one tall, broad, featureless in the low light, walking single file toward the shore, toward where Kieran and Matt had been moments earlier. The clip ended there. Charles sent the footage to the police. They said it was too unclear to investigate. He showed it to me in person the following week. And I can tell you, even through the pixel blur and noise, that what I saw was no trick of light. Those figures were real. They had been waiting on that island long before anyone ever found them. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't guarding the stolen boat at all. Maybe they were guarding what had been buried there. That night, after hearing everything, I couldn't stop thinking about the lagoon, the 4 figures on the dock, the stolen boat, the man with the shovel. All the pieces fit too perfectly, like a pattern we were never meant to see. Because if Kieran's footage was real, then those 4 shadows we saw all those years ago didn't just disappear into the water. They never left.